Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer for RDH Building Science and your host. My guest today is Nicole Blair, owner of Nicole Blair LLC in Austin, Texas. Nicole is an architect and general contractor working in Austin, the city where she was born and raised. Her practice focuses on residential, small commercial, and public art building projects. Nicole's design approach is client and context-driven, striving to find novel solutions that are closely tailored to her client's needs and personal style. In 2019, Elle Decor named Nicole one of the greatest living architects in the world, alongside several Pritzker Prize winners. Her projects have received numerous design awards, local to international, and her work has been published in books, magazines, and ad campaigns worldwide. She gained early work experience in the New York City offices of Robert A.M. Stern and Peter Eisenman Architects and obtained a Bachelor of Science in Textiles and Apparel from Cornell and a Master of Architecture from Rice. The really cool project we are going to talk about today is the Hive, located in central East Austin, Texas. The Hive is a 550 square foot accessory dwelling unit, or an ADU, situated behind a primary residence. To meet the City of Austin's pervious cover requirements, the maximum footprint that was allowed for the ADU on this 6,500 square foot residential lot was only 320 square feet. To accommodate a one-bedroom dwelling, walls creatively tilt from the slab, hugging building setback planes, and an angled utility easement at the back of the property to add volume and opportunities for more square footage where needed, evoking the shape of a beehive, hence the Hive. Now let's get into the details. Hi, everybody. My guest today is Nicole Blair, owner of Nicole Blair LLC in Austin, Texas, a city I happen to love. I've been there. Nicole, welcome to Detailed. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Cherise.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today because I'm really particularly excited to talk about this project. So I always start off, my listeners that are already listening know I start off with an icebreaker question that's usually just off the rails, something totally different than what we're about to talk about, just to get us warmed up and talking. And so for you today, you have this interesting background in textiles and then your master's in architecture. So, anybody that's involved in those kinds of things is seeing beauty in a lot of what they do. But I would like to ask you, how do you define beauty in another person?
Yeah. For me, the people that I find most beautiful in this world have the ability to stimulate my brain in some way, whether it's something that they say or do or make. It's something that will provoke curiosity in me and interest. And a few people that come to mind are my grandmother, for one. She's someone that lived very frugally, but surrounded herself with a bunch of objects that she made just from household objects. She was very hardworking. She mowed her own lawn into her 80s and she sewed her own clothes, but she could just make anything out of a household object and bring it to life in some kind of beautiful, creative way. And another person that I think of that I've been more interested in recently is maybe Lionel Messi, the soccer player. I've gotten very interested in soccer. There's a new soccer team in Austin, and I've been watching Lionel Messi play this season. And the way that he's able to very quietly kind of patiently walk around a soccer field, and how he can see the formation of the other players and what's happening, and kind of insert himself in a way that kind of seems to sort of effortlessly get the ball into the goal through these pockets of space that it seems that other players aren't kind of able to see. Is just, it's so fascinating to me. I'm just mesmerized watching him play, and how he's able to kind of command and interact with the other players on the soccer field. Um, Another person that comes to mind is a fashion designer that is the head designer for Schiaparelli right now, Daniel Rossberry. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm not.
But he creates these very whimsical, fantastic articles of clothing that are really fit and shaped to the body. And there's something about the work that feels sort of novel, but also very familiar at the same time. And he's playing with materials and patterns and color in a way that I'm just like totally blown away. So those are a few people that come to mind right now.
You know, when I was trolling you on the internet, I had this feeling we were going to connect. And in your answer leads to part of that. The fact that before we even started this interview, we talked about beer,
Right.
and good beer, and then soccer. So I've actually been to an Austin game in Austin.
Okay.
But I am a season ticket holder for the Portland Timbers.
Okay. Well, then you know exactly where my excitement comes from.
Yes, I
Yeah.
do. I do. I am a new season ticket holder. So soccer is actually a new adventure. I've been a sports fan in a number of arenas my whole life, but soccer is a new adventure for me. And I'm having our last game actually is tomorrow.
Ours
Regular
too.
season. Yeah.
Yeah.
So see, we have all these things in common already. And I
Yeah.
love interesting people, which is part of the reason why this podcast is so much fun for me. Because every time I get a new person on the screen, it's this new human with these interests and a different worldview to share that I would never get to have any other way. So I'm just more excited every minute that you're here.
Oh, thank you.
So let's talk about this project. And I'm going to start with a more broad question, and we will get into more specific and detailed information as we move along. I have, for most of my career, worked on very large commercial projects. So I've never worked for a firm that does residential projects. I don't have as much exposure to that work. So an architect friend of mine in California mentioned to me some years back that she was actually complaining about this ADU she was working on. My first response was, "What's an ADU? What does that mean?" And now I hear it everywhere, and I'm hearing it more and more and more every day. What do you think is driving accessory dwelling unit, by the way, people? I suppose I should define that because you might not know. I didn't know at one time. What do you think is driving this seemingly increased interest in ADUs now as opposed to in the past?
I I think there's so many reasons why people want to build ADUs. It becomes can be a secondary source of income for them, especially in Austin. Unfortunately, property taxes are pretty high, and so a lot of people I know in Austin that want to stay central, that want to stay closer to downtown, are considering ADUs for to add density and for for added income on their property, because the land development code in Austin doesn't allow for a lot else on a single family lot, and there are a lot of single family neighborhoods in central Austin. So it's become a way that homeowners can add density. It's also a way that families can age in place. People want a spot for their mother or father to come back and live close by, or maybe they have a child who's in college and it can be a more affordable location for them to live closer to home than to pay for offsite housing. Um, I think I think a city like Austin is it's growing so fast and it's eager to densify. A lot of people want to live downtown, and there's a real demand for that. And building an ADU is one of the only ways that currently single family properties are able to start densifying.
Well, I will tell you, this ADU that we're talking about today, the Hive, I would be ridiculously grateful when I got old if my kid built one of these for me, because I happen to be in love with this house.
Oh, thanks.
When I think ADU, I think almost a tiny home mentality. I expect to see something that looks and feels very small. And this one is 550 square feet, but it does not look like it's 550 square feet in the picture. I feel like I need to come to Austin now and see it. But how about you start with a general description of this home and the spaces within it? Because it does not, 550 square feet doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it doesn't, but it looks like a very spacious, light, open home. Describe this home for me.
Sure. Well, the the owners are in film, and they were living in the main house, but because of their profession, they were off site, on location for 8 or 10 months out of the year, and the main house was empty. And so they wanted to take advantage of renting that house out, but they still wanted use of the property for 2 to 3 months a year. And so they contacted me to design an ADU for them so that they could stay on property and have a place a couple of months out of the year, but still rent out the main house. When they contacted me, I feel like they had a fairly large program in mind. They wanted a 1 bedroom. They wanted a large kitchen, like kind of a cook's kitchen. They wanted laundry. They wanted bike storage. They wanted an outdoor shower. They wanted an office space. So we didn't initially start out with the idea of it being a smaller footprint, but after I did some of the pre-design work and started looking at their existing conditions, there was an angled utility easement that ran through the back of the property, and their main house bungalow had a large wraparound porch in the back. And so after I had kind of taken into consideration the parking and the impervious cover and all of these setbacks, in the city of Austin guidelines, we weren't able to have a footprint larger than 320 square feet. So I kind of starting from that point, knowing all of the spaces that they wanted, how am I going to fit all of this program in a 320 square foot footprint and still give them something that feels like a place that feels like home for them? So once I started looking at it a little bit more closely, I had the idea to lean some of the walls away from that smaller foundation. And once you put a stair to code, you're automatically pushed further away from that point. So I thought, why don't we lean the walls? Why don't we use the angle of the utility easement and try to fit all of these things in as economically as possible, keeping in mind that they obviously wanted it to still feel like a much larger space.
Well, you definitely achieved that.
Yeah.
Because it looks like a much larger space. Let's start digging into more specific detail. Let's start with the exterior of the home. Tell me in more detail about the exterior, your design vision. You talked a little bit about those angled walls, which, by the way, the windows in the kitchen that are angled are really cool. Materials that you chose. Let's get into what's your wall assembly look like as far as, like insulation, things like that. Tell me about everything on the outside that you did.
Okay. one of the things I was looking at first was their existing house, and the existing house had that wraparound porch addition that I was telling you about, and that had been done years prior by another designer, a friend of theirs, and it had a bit of a Japanese sensibility to it, and it was also constructed with a lot of reused, recycled materials. And one of the requests of the owner early on was that she liked using recycled materials and could I consider those in the process of the design. So, kind of in looking at that and looking at some Japanese precedents and some Dutch precedents with leaning walls. So, during the process of design, one of the goals of the client was to incorporate some recycled materials in the project. So in the course of design, the owner called me, and she was replacing the metal roof, and when they had of the main house, and when they took the metal roof off, it turned out they had found a layer of shingles underneath the roof, and she called and sent me some photos of these and asked if we could reuse them in the project. I had looked at some precedents with that had been so I started looking at precedents with cedar shakes and shingles and was wondering if we could use it as a siding material. The cedar shingles that were on the main house didn't end up being durable enough, or there weren't quite enough of them for the entire structure. So I started calling around to people that I had known, to people that I know in the community, and a roofer that I had been working with on another project mentioned that he had taken some cedar shakes off of off of a house, maybe 20 years prior. Basically said he had thought of them as kindling at this point and offered them to the project. So we ended up so it turned out they were, I could send you some pictures of, I guess you can see it in the project itself. The shakes were several times larger than the shingles that came off of the original bungalow, and they ended up being a perfect material for the roof and siding to kind of wrap the exterior.
I would not have guessed that you were about to tell me that story.
Oh, really? Okay.
Based on looking at the building, I did not see that coming at all.
Okay.
That's a really interesting way to do something. I mean, literally, they were going to be firewood.
Yeah, I think he had been saving them for a while, and then it just turned out this ended up being the perfect fit for being able to reuse those. And I think it takes a certain client, type of client that has those kinds of interests that kind of open your mind to those possibilities. So it was important to the owner to have an entry that was hidden. So I always think of the main entry as the entry on that window wall that opens out to the neighboring yard that you see right on approach. But the owner, it was important to her for the entry to be a little more private. So she sees the main entry as the door that's past the building and around the corner. So because she saw that as the main entry, I also wanted that to be covered. So one of the nice things about the leaning wall is that kind of creates a covered porch on that side. And she also wanted an outdoor shower. So that porch, also because it was more private, became like the perfect spot in my mind also for that outdoor shower. So on approach, you can see it as a covered porch, but also doubles as a shower. And the shingles in that portion, I tried to separate them and create a little bit of a gap for light and for air to pass through in that outdoor shower area. And I was hoping that and there's a light in that space when it's on, when you're in the yard, it was my intention for that space to kind of glow like a lantern.
I'm assuming there's a shower inside as well. Actually, I have to ask that. I just have to know. It's
In
not
the bathroom upstairs,
okay.
yes.
Okay,
Not the only shower is the outdoors.
Just check it. It's like,
Yeah.
are they taking all their showers outside?
No.
So, well, and it's always great to have a client who's willing to think outside the box, so to speak, and consider different
Right.
ways of doing things, especially if they're things that are going to be good for the environment in the long run. Because it's always better to reuse something that's already there than to go create more things being manufactured. Okay, let's move to the inside. So let's go through each space in the house. Describe
Okay.
to me in more technical detail what each space has. What are some of the cool things you did there? Materials you used that. 'Cause this is a very nice looking house. This is not, some people might think you go put together this quick little thing in the backyard. This is not this home. So, what are the things you did? And this is a filmmaker who lives here, so they're not going to be. My assumption would be they're going to want a nice space. What are some of the things you did in the inside, and what are the different spaces that ended up being in the final design?
Yeah, I mean, if we start in the kitchen, the owner wanted a considerable amount of countertop space so that she could use it as kind of a cook's kitchen, which, of course, with a 320 square foot footprint is hard to do. So, leaning the walls did allow for the footprint to stay small and for quite a bit of counter space to be available because of two of those walls in the kitchen leaning away from the foundation. The base cabinets are IKEA cabinets, and that was really with budget in mind. But what ended up happening during construction was the subcontractor that was building the cabinets was working on another project nearby, a bungalow which had longleaf pine on the interior walls that was coming out. And he actually suggested that if we were interested in that material, we could consider using that as for a custom front on for the cabinetry. And so it wasn't originally part of the design, but because it was material that was already available and he had access to it and he was interested in using it, we were able to kind of pivot during the construction process to take advantage of that. And of course, because I was the architect and the contractor, I think that transition was easier, and it kind of set off a set of other decisions that needed to pivot to kind of match that. For example, we had originally planned for a white pine floor, and with a longleaf pine, the client loved the product, and so we incorporated it not only in the kitchen and on a tall set of cabinetry downstairs. There was enough material that it extends up and creates a desk, an office space on the landing of the stair above, and even enough material for the fronts of a built-in bed in the bedroom and a small cabinet in the bathroom.
Wow. It's something you totally didn't plan for in design. And that has to be, I mean, nothing against IKEA. IKEA has all kinds of cool stuff, but not everything is always super warm, especially when it comes to things like cabinets. So I can imagine that was a game changer.
Yeah, I think it totally transformed the interior. The material has a really nice quality that coordinates with the cedar shakes on the exterior. So that was something I really liked about it. And then we were able to find another local material from Delta Millworks, a Shishugibon. It was like a black charred wood. And they had some material that was durable enough for use as a floor. The darker lines in the longleaf pine picked up so nicely with the Shishugibon that we used that for the staircase, and we had enough left over to do the top of the desk area and a small countertop in the bedroom as well, and even some extra cutoffs. We ended up making a divider in the closet, so half of the closet in the bedroom is private for the owner all the time. And then the other half, if they want to have guests, they can lock their half and give guests access to the other half of the closet. So it became a divider internally.
So I'm extra curious about this kitchen because I recently bought a townhome and my kitchen is not very big. And I raised a large family, and I used to have a pretty large house, and I struggle a little bit with this not very big kitchen. And I know this client wanted, a cook's kitchen with a lot of counter space. Um, that's not easy to achieve. So tell me how you achieved this cook's kitchen, because it looks like a spacious kitchen in the pictures. How did you achieve that? Because I'm looking for some tips. If there's anything I can do here to make this kitchen feel like it has more space. Um, how did you achieve that for the owner so that they kind of got that kitchen they wanted, even in a much smaller space?
Right. Well, I think the leaning walls help a lot. So I think underneath the cabinets, for most of the cabinets, only a foot of that 2 foot depth is actually part of the foundation. And then they lean away. And I think we ended up doing a downdraft cooktop with a really large window above it. And the downdraft just provided a more open visual space above to be able to see out. And then the countertop wraps around so that you can have cabinetry on one side, but the other side doubles as their dining room table. And then on the long wall, there's 2 foot deep cabinetry under the taller part of the stair. And then as you ascend across the staircase, there's narrower cabinets that extend across from the stair, but then underneath portions of the stair, you can get 2 foot sets of drawers below that as well. So we were able to utilize the space beside the stair, but also under the stair for deeper storage, if that makes sense.
It does, because I opened up my file folder while I was talking to you because I couldn't
Right.
stand it anymore. And I'm looking at the pictures right now. So when I looked at these pictures before, I totally did not spot those hidden cabinets.
Okay.
I did not spot that when I looked before. And storage in a kitchen is another thing that I struggle with in my little tiny kitchen downstairs. I love that. To have that storage, but looking at the picture, it's a wall, and that wood is gorgeous, by the way. That looks gorgeous. That's a game changer. I'm trying to picture that with just like normal white cabinets, and that looks fantastic. That stairwell is interesting too. Tell me what's going on with this stairwell, and what's at the top of those stairs.
At the top of the stairs in the landing, that is kind of a multi-purpose space. The railing doubles as a desk, like a large L-shaped desk. And also below the desk is book storage, and the owner really likes to listen to records, and so it also fits record storage. On a typical desk under the knee space, you wouldn't typically find bookshelves extending under that space, but it gave us an opportunity to create bookshelves right behind the desk at a lower point in the ceiling is a laundry closet. So the desk also doubles as kind of a folding table as well.
I'm scrolling through these as you're talking to me about the house, and it's just such a fantastic use of space. What, just out of curiosity, it's one of my going down a rabbit hole for a second. What is the material on the floor in the kitchen? It almost looks like concrete.
It is.
Oh, yeah. It is.
It's a polished concrete. It's just the foundation polished as to a polished concrete, which I think coordinates nicely with the walls. So all of the interior walls are a 3-coat stucco, like a traditional stucco material, which I think adds like a tranquility, like a calmness to the space, which was also important to the owner.
I love that concrete floor. It's like, is that concrete? Is it tile? And I'm just thinking it's concrete. Okay, so tell me about the bedroom.
So the bedroom has a pretty small footprint. The owner originally wanted a double bed, but then during construction asked if we could fit a queen. So luckily with the leaning walls, we just made it a little bit higher. added some really deep storage drawers underneath and some storage behind, and fit a queen bed, which you can sit in and kind of even lean against the walls, against the leaning walls, or lean against the back of the bed. And it kind of feels a little bit like a built-in day bed, I would say. And then even though the floor of the bedroom is only about 30 square feet, with the walls leaning out, especially at the height that you're at when you're sitting in bed or standing, I think the space feels much bigger.
It definitely looks bigger. So I just spotted what I'm assuming would be what you would call the living room. Is that directly on the same floor, directly facing the kitchen?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and you can see it's not a large space either. You can fit a couch, a small coffee table, a couple of chairs, but because that wall behind the couch also leans out, the space feels a lot bigger. And you get a little bit of a visual back up to that office space above, which I think also helps expand your view and makes the entire space feel larger, even though it's fairly compact.
Well, that whole wall of windows on one side of that space also, you can never have enough windows for me, ever. And that really, I think, really opens up that space too. It may be a smaller space when you're standing in it, but looking at it, it doesn't look like a small space.
Yeah, and that window wall is facing north, so northern light is ideal, for kind of indirect soft light. But also, the other reason it became a perfect location for that is because of that angled utility easement that's running through the back of the client's property that extends into the neighbor's property. So we always knew that that would remain yard space for them, and the neighbor also wouldn't be building in that area. So that window wall will always be able to have a view that's two lots deep, that's unobstructed. So that was also nice because when you're designing an ADU and you're so close to the primary structure, you're looking for a little bit of privacy. Um, Something like that angled utility easement gives you an opportunity to take advantage of a view in a direction that you don't always have.
The nature part of that would be really nice too. Just not, I see all the green outside, all of this glass. There's a lot of windows in
Mm-hmm.
this house, and it just, I'm looking at one view of the kitchen with that slanted window that I think is so cool. It's just greenery outside of it, and that's going to add to the space.
And the owner, um, as she had stated earlier, wanted to use some reuse to use recycled materials. All of the windows in this space that are casement are fixed. We found, actually on Craigslist, there was a house on the coast that had installed them, but then they had to remove them even during construction because they didn't meet hurricane standards. So they're a La Cantina uh, steel window, which is a very high quality window. And because we were reusing them, we were able to get them at a fraction of the original price, which fit the client's budget. And then that is what ended up generating the design of that window wall. So we knew we had a particular La Cantina window size that we were working with and a standard door at that point. And then that kind of set the dimensions and the spacing for figuring out the rest of that window wall space.
Do I remember correctly reading that there are some custom fixtures?
There are, so I don't know if I'd actually, maybe you would call them custom. So again, mostly for cost concerns, but also for design, we used kind of a standard porcelain socket for a lot of the light fixtures. And then there's an artist in Austin named Andy Colquitt who I admire, and he in his career had designed some light fixtures using splitters. So a very standard product that you can, find in any hardware store. And just a single socket with splitters and some interesting bulbs can create a pretty fantastic art light fixture. So we ended up using those throughout the house, and then like over the dining area, we used some splitters and created like a more dramatic light fixtures over that space.
Let's go back to talking about your grandma. How many different ways you were really frugal in what you did, but still created this beautiful space and this dramatic effect, like with these light fixtures and reusing that wood that your contractor had from the other site. That is, in my opinion, a game changer in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And the what you did with the shingles outside, I think that is a huge lesson on how much you can do with a lot less than you think. And
Right.
getting the windows from this other project. I would not have guessed any of these things looking at this space before talking to you today. And I think we could all learn from that you can create beautiful spaces with, number one, with reused materials, and maybe not necessarily always the most expensive thing on the market. Uh, I, I think this house is a poster child for that message. What would you say was your biggest challenge? I don't know why this is, and please forgive me, but every time I look at this house, Old Mother Hubbard pops in, in the shoe house. Obviously, it doesn't look like a shoe, but for some reason, I get that kind of vibe
Mm-hmm.
from like a modern Art Deco version of Old Mother Hubbard's house. What was the big, because everything is tilted and leaning and sloped going on in this building. What was the biggest design challenge?
I think really the biggest challenge was after we had the design, we started bidding it out with contractors, and all the bids were coming in way over budget, more than the client could afford. And so the project got shelved for maybe 6 or 8 months. And then, she really wanted to build it. I really wanted it to get built. So finally, this was the project I decided maybe I should contract it myself, because I felt if I could have conversations with subcontractors directly one on one and show them what was unusual, but how it is also typical, that we could bring those numbers down. And so that's exactly what I did. And I was able to get some better figures, and ones that she was willing to agree to. But again, we at that point, we were assuming we would use IKEA cabinets and we wouldn't spend a lot of money on light fixtures. But what ended up happening over the course of design and construction as we moved further on was, she got more invested in the project. She had some time to save up a little bit of money. And as we moved through the project, because I was the contractor and the architect, we got to make some decisions like, let's use longleaf pine, or let's like save money and spend even less on light fixtures. Or so it ended up even though it was a big challenge, it ended up being what I think made the project more special in the end.
Were there one of the things, and I'll qualify this, that I usually hear this from California architects, but one of the things I hear a lot is challenges with the building department and getting it permitted to build ADUs, and that can be very difficult. And I know in California it can take a year or two sometimes to get those permits. Were there any challenges with permitting to get to get this built? I know you had a really small footprint you had to work with, but you totally solved that problem with those
Right.
sloped walls. But was it challenging? What piece of advice would you give somebody dealing with a building department in an ADU?
Well, I will say I have a project that's under construction in LA County right now, and I will say that permitting projects in LA is more difficult than permitting projects in Austin. Although we did spend, we spent 12 or 18 months trying to get a permit for the house that I designed in LA. In Austin, when I was permitting this project, we did run into a little bit of an issue with the reviewer because there was nothing in the code that accounted for leaning walls. So I had to negotiate with them to consider just the footprint of the building as the impervious cover. And it was, I think, fairly easy to make the case that rain and water is still going to get to all of the areas all the way next to the foundation itself. And that wasn't going to be a barrier for the ground there to absorb rain and water, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And it sounds to me anywhere, because these things are fairly unknown, especially if you're doing something unique, to start having those conversations. Don't get your design all done and then put it in for a permit. Maybe go in and have some early conversations with your building department.
Exactly. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would definitely recommend. Not only, I think the guidelines for ADUs are different in every city, so my advice would be to research those and then meet with your building official before you start design, because they can probably bring some details to your attention that can help you in the design process.
So I have to ask, typically my question about construction is typically centered around, what was your biggest challenge during construction? But this project is different because you're the architect and you are also the general contractor. And well, I have had a couple of guests who have jumped into that pool. You don't get to have that conversation very often. So just tell me a little bit about, is this the first project that you decided to be a general contractor on?
This was the first new construction project, and I had started a couple of renovation projects concurrently that I had started just before this one, but this was the first project that was a new construction project that I contracted.
So tell me about that. Tell me about that experience. I mean, there has to be some lessons learned that you took to the next project. How'd that all go? I mean, I think it's a fantastic way to do it if you can manage all that. It's a lot of risk all on you, but tell me about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy being on site and talking to the subcontractors and working things out. And you see different conditions in the field than you see two-dimensionally on a computer. So for someone like me, or like architects in general that like to problem solve, I think being on site and running into all of those challenges that happen every single day, it's like, to me, it's kind of another opportunity to creatively solve a problem that comes up. And actually, when I think about challenges in my career, I would say, for me, the biggest challenges I've faced is when I design something and then there is a contractor that's building it and I don't get to be a part of that conversation. I don't get to help problem solve. I think those are the situations that keep me up at night, where I'm not a part of the solution. And so, the answer to that is for me to be more involved in the construction process and to take more ownership of that part of the process, and to to take advantage of the opportunities that can come up in construction when you are the person that also understands the design intent better than anyone else at that point. So, but that's not to say there weren't a lot of challenges that came up during the construction process. I could give you a few. So, for example, the owner originally wanted a tub, like a bathtub in the bathroom, um, until she saw it installed. So we got to the point where it was already installed, even though I had kind of suggested maybe a shower would be better. It was installed, all of the stucco walls were in, and she came to the site and said, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I think you're right. I don't think the tub works. So we took the tub out, and of course, then there's a problem to solve. So we have plumbing at the end of a wall designed for a tub, and now we need to turn it into a shower. So that was, one of my favorite parts of the project. Actually, is how we solved that problem. So I met with a stucco subcontractor who said, the best thing we can do is just redo the stucco on one wall, the smallest wall, the end wall where the window is. And of course, our plumbing was on one of the larger walls. And so I then met with the plumber, and we came up with a way to redirect the copper in a way that it looked like a towel bar into the space, and then redirected it into that shorter wall where we could install just the shower head on that wall. So then the stucco subcontractor only had to redo that shorter wall. And I think that towel bar is one of my favorite features of the house, and I would have never designed that at my computer, like during design. It's something that is based on the conditions of the time, where you have to solve an unusual problem and coming up with the best solution.
So I'm looking at the towel bar right now. So that's not just a decoration, that's actually working plumbing.
The water is running through it.
That is a fantastic solution. I mean, I thought it looked cool the first time I saw it. I just didn't consider it when I first looked at it. I just thought it was a lot of this kind of rustic look kind of thing is all over the place. I have some of it in my own house. I just thought it was a decoration to be this cool thing to hang the towels on. It didn't occur to me that that was the actual plumbing.
Yeah, it was. So the hot and cold controls were coming out of that wall, and then we needed them to get to the other wall. So we're like, how can we do that without it looking like a mistake? So we designed the towel bar, and I was hoping that it might even work like a towel warmer with like hot water running through, but it doesn't.
It doesn't. Well, I mean, that's not only is it a great way to solve the problem that you had without burying these pipes in the wall, but you did it with fixtures and piping that looks good. So it adds to the aesthetics of this space at the same time solving the problem of having to take that tub out. That's a great challenge.
I think, yeah. I mean, those are the kinds of opportunities that I love, getting to participate in the construction process, that just aren't things that come up when you're designing on paper before you're in the field.
So are you still doing general contracting for projects?
Yeah, I have a project that I've completed many. I'm finishing up a project right now that is a house from 1900 with an addition to it in East Austin that I think is turning out really beautifully. A couple of years ago, I finished another ADU project in East Austin called The Perch, which is getting a lot of attention right now. And I'm actually in the process of prepping for the homes tour. It's going to be on the AIA Austin Homes Tour in a couple of weeks. So And that was also really fun. I took a lot of lessons from the Hive to the perch and shaping that building based on site plan constraints as well.
So that's a perfect lead in to my next question, because my next question is looking back, because I had to battle with myself on whether we were going to talk today about the Hive or the perch, because I looked at both of you, offered both of those up as a potential. What lessons did you take from the Hive to the projects you did going forward from that time? That, the things that, we always have to problem solve on projects. So I don't even like to call them problems. I call them challenges as you're going through, and you always learn something from that. And then you do it differently or better, or, have some different process the next time because you learned something from going through that this time. What were the biggest lessons from this particular home that made your next one even easier?
Tailoring the space in 3 dimensions, and looking at the site plan constraints and the client's concerns, taking them very seriously and trying to make sure that you're meeting all of their requirements. I think sometimes it's the constraints that you're given on a project that can lead to the most interesting results. And, you know, not shying away from trying to solve those in the most creative way possible. I think also, client driven at the Hive was the use of recycled materials. And I think in that project, it added a lot of warmth, and there's a lot of history to those materials that we got to use. So at the perch, at other projects that I'm working on now, more and more, I'm encouraging clients to use found materials, recycled materials, fixtures that they already own, looking for other clues on site for materials and ideas that we can borrow from. I think those are some of the more important lessons that I've taken from the Hive so far.
Well, and I will tell you just my personal warm fuzzy self, and my reactions to any kind of space or building are all emotional, but it's a game changer what you did with that, and having a client that was willing to do that, and motivated to do that, and the effort that you made to find those things and then use them in a really creative way is really a game changer in this building, in this home. And I don't think I would have had the same response. I think it's cool no matter what, but part of what makes it so cool are exactly those things that you did to it. So I love that you say that you're continuing to do that going forward. Like, hey, we could do some really interesting stuff. What's your favorite? If you had to pick one area or piece or part of this home, what's your favorite thing?
My favorite thing. Well, one thing you just said that kind of jogged my memory is the client who I had mentioned before is a filmmaker. And at the end of the project, she said that watching the process of the construction of the Hive reminded her of her job as a film director, which I thought was really interesting. She kind of talked about how, she starts with a script, and she has a list of locations she wants to use and shots she's planning to do. But really, what she felt like was most important about her role as a director was to kind of set all that in motion and have a plan, but then to be aware of what's happening naturally in those situations, and to kind of pivot to take advantage of like a scene, or what, like, to kind of run with what a particular character is doing or saying, and that it's really her job to just kind of be in tune with what's happening around her and to take advantage of those opportunities. So anyway, when you were just mentioning her again, it reminded me of that analogy that she made that I thought was really important. But my favorite, I sort of feel like buildings are kind of like your kids. So there's not, there's no, you can't really have a favorite. There's not really a favorite part. I think that it's all about all the parts working together, and in unison, right? It's important that you're constantly looking at all of the pieces, and they're constantly in motion and they're in flux. So as one thing changes, seeing what else needs to adjust to kind of stay in harmony with the rest of the project.
There, and that is a very politically correct parental response. You can't have a favorite. I love them all equally, even though they're different. Um, what can we look forward to from Nicole Blair going forward? What are you working on now, and what exciting things are we going to see you walking across some awards stage for?
Well, I guess I'm not sure. We'll find out. I have a project under construction in LA, which I'm very excited about. It's for a woman who lost her house in the fire, one of those Los Angeles fires, and it's on Lake Malibu. So you probably know Malibu, on the beach, and then there's a mountain range right behind there, and on the other side of that mountain is a lake. So and it's sort of a lake community. It feels kind of like you're in like a mountain cabin kind of scene. It does not feel like LA at all. And so the design of that house is an undulating roof that's sort of shaped to mimic the Santa Monica Mountains that it sits around. And she also needed a very small footprint because as a fire rebuild, she couldn't, the new house could not be more than 110% the size of the previous house, and the previous house was pretty small. So I think we fit 4 bedrooms and 3.5 baths in less than 2,300 square feet. But again, when you play with proportions and scale, you can make a very small space feel spacious, and there's a lot of outdoor space. Deep covered porches that shield the setting sun, because the best view is towards the lake, but that's also where the setting sun is. And so it has a really dramatic roof line that I'm really excited about. And then, as I mentioned before, the house in Austin that I'm wrapping up construction on now is the main house, which is just 2 rooms with a fireplace in each room and a hall that built in 1900. I did an addition. We renovated that space, and I did an addition to it that tries to respect that that existing house. The addition steps down and it sits behind the main house. And there's some details inside that project that I'm excited about, like a railing that bends and creates like a little seat at the top of the stair that kind of hovers over the lower staircase below. And we borrowed a lot of materials from that time period in 1900. So using a lot of the same types of wood, and again, stucco again. The original interior of that house was stucco. I've got a project under construction in Albuquerque, a renovation to an adobe house for a client that I had in Austin. And then they moved to Albuquerque and bought this very quaint adobe house, and we're renovating the kitchen, living, and dining spaces of that house. And that's exciting too, because we're borrowing from the details of the artisans and craftspeople that had worked on that adobe house to begin with, and kind of doing a more modern kitchen, but borrowing some of the chunkiness and the a lot of these sort of angled kind of, I guess that's sort of there's sort of like a southwest feel to a lot of these spaces, to a lot of the details in the house that we're kind of borrowing in that kitchen design. So those are a few that I'm working on now.
So I know what I can call you for later. So,
What's that?
so Nicole, these cool houses you told me about in the interview, ready to talk to me about them yet? So
Oh,
I
right.
would love to have you back and talk about those as they get finished, because now it's like color me curious. I want to see, but you're not done yet. So hopefully you'll come back. We typically close out every episode with a couple of final questions, one being a broader industry question, and then one being our final question that everybody gets. So for you, if I came to you and I was an architect wanting to embark on designing ADUs, what would your top 3 pieces of advice be to me to help me start off on the right foot?
Well, I think one we talked about earlier, I think I definitely look up what the ADU requirements in your area are specifically, and then I would meet with a building reviewer before you even started the design process, just to get some feedback on what to expect in that area. Um, I mean, just given my own experience, I would say consider a smaller footprint. Um, if you, I think smaller footprints use less materials, they're more energy efficient, you're heating and cooling less area, less space. You can, with a given budget, you can spend more per square foot on making the materials that you use higher quality and nicer. And I think if you consider shaping the space more in 3 dimensions, I think again there's some efficiencies that you can take advantage of with again, like if you have if you are building space, 3 dimensional space where you need it most, but tailoring it back where you don't need it, then again you're saving um, you're saving on material costs, you're saving on heating and cooling costs in the long run, and you're allowing the owner to have room for in the future if they need to add on to the house again or for another programmatic need or more yard space. They're not maxing out all of the possible usable square footage in one time.
One other thing that, one more rabbit hole, I promise this is the last one. One other thing that you mentioned while we've been chatting was, about, the initial bids coming in higher than you wanted to spend. And part of that may be because maybe contractors were a little bit intimidated by the unique design in these slanted walls. Do you think there would be a benefit to maybe, because most architects are not going to GC their own projects. I know some might consider that, but do you think it would be a benefit to pair up with a contractor earlier? Um,
Sure. I think the sooner you can start talking to someone about your design ideas and what they're comfortable with, the better.
so the final question, everybody gets this one.
Okay.
As human beings, we all hope that our actions in this life will, in some way, make the world a better place. Doesn't mean they have to be huge things. Sometimes little things make the biggest ripples. For me, I call my mission, my personal mission to make the world a better place, my world domination statement, meaning my world, not the entire world. I don't have bandwidth for that one. So, personal or professional, how do you as an individual hope to make a difference or make an impact on your world? What is your personal world domination statement?
That is a hard question. I would say, I guess I'd hope when people are looking at my work that it might inspire them to think more about the scale of what they're working on and um, can consider if whether or not what they're designing could potentially be smaller. So, for example, I think I once attended a lecture by Stephen Hull where he was talking about the design of I think it's the Chiasma Museum. Um, and he said that after he designed it, they bid the project and it came back 30% over budget. And so what they decided to do in response to that was just to scale the whole building down 30%. And after they did that, he said the building scale and how it felt inside actually appealed to him more than the original design. Um, and I think just based on my own experience and scale being something that architects have so much control over, I would hope that like my work might inspire other architects to look at their own work and ask like, could my project be 10% smaller? Could it be 15% smaller? Like, is it right sized for the project at hand? Are there spaces that could be eliminated or considered in a different way that would require less volume, less materials, better overall? I think it's good for the environment. So yeah, that would that would be my thought at this point.
Well, I think that's a pretty good mission. And Stephen actually was one of my guests.
Oh, was he?
Yeah,
Okay.
early, probably, it's maybe, has it been a year already? Time does not, after COVID, I have no sense of time and space. Nicole, thank you so much for joining me on Detail today. It has been a pleasure. This is a fantastic home. So listeners, go check it out. Go troll Nicole on the internet. And next time I make it to Austin, I'm going to be calling you. And first, you, me, and your husband are going to go drink some beer. And then I'd love to see this home if I'm in the neighborhoods anytime in the near future.
I'd be happy to give you a tour. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.